All right. All right. So good afternoon, Cheney family. We are so happy that you all have joined us in another edition of the Summer Scholar.
All right. So good afternoon, Cheney family.
One second.
We are so happy that you all have joined us in another edition of the Summer Scholar.
We are so happy that you all have joined us in another edition of the Summer Scholar. Today, our topic is equity in education. Are all students getting the education they need to be successful? And so today, I have some very, very esteemed panelists who I am extremely excited about. And so I'm going to go counterclockwise and introduce these panelists. And I'm going to start with Dr. Jillian Wadley. Dr. Wadley is a school psychologist and the director of student support services for Clark County Schools, which is on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. Hi, Dr. Wadley. Okay. Our next guest is Dr. Ivy Bonk. Dr. Bonk is not only an educational psychologist, but she is the author of Grounded Learning Education's Recovery Plan. One of the focuses of this discussion, she does a lot of work with equity in education. So we're really excited to have her. And last but definitely not least is the auspicious Dr. Christy Roberts Lewis, who is not only an author, but a public speaker, a chair, a professor, I'm professor and the chair of public policy at Southern University. So ladies, I want to say once again, welcome, welcome, welcome. And we're so happy to have you today. Okay, and so before we go any further, I want to make sure that our guests understand what the subject of our discussion is today. So we're talking about equity in education. You know, there are a lot of people who are talking about, racism in the school system, and a lot of people who are having issues with critical race theory. And those subjects are kind of akin to what we're talking about here today, but we're specifically dealing with how it is that systems of racism and systems of inequality have affected not just Black and Brown students, but disenfranchised students in general. How have they been affected in our school systems, and what can we do to address these things? So I'm going to start with Dr. Ivy. And Dr. Ivy, tell us a little bit about your work with equity in education.
Thank you, Dr. Carolyn. And I'll just go ahead and say from the beginning, it's obvious I'm very white. So I don't speak from experience, the Black experience, although I have had racism in my life experience, which I can mention. But anyway, so in 2020, yeah, all these things that I have been finding and researching over the last several years began to culminate into a framework and into a model, which I call Grounded Learning. That's the name of the book. But because I was continuing to see, as you said, the inequity in our education system. So, we have a lot of programs. We talk about programs, but that we need a systemic change. And so this is what Grounded Learning does. For me, from my perspective, research and experience, educators and education should be about the facilitating of the telling of a story, which I'm talking about students. So all stories. And students should be centric to what we're doing, not the curriculums or the programs, but the student. Students learn in context. And so everybody's context is just as important as another. And so being able to deliver education in that way, I think is the shift that we need to see. And so we have all the right things. We don't need any more programs per se. Certainly we can create more good programs, but we have to do what we know to do, and we have to do it in the right order. And so just continue to throw money at things while we can't systemically sustain when I first came out of my doctorate, because this was a result, and I'll make this quick, I don't want to take up everybody's time. But when I was a administrator at a school, and I would see students that were being misdiagnosed with learning disabilities who in fact were manifesting symptoms from trauma. And for me, knowing what I knew about the education system at that point, it became a matter of justice. And so since that time, that was 2008, when that aha dropped on me, I went to get a doctorate, and that is my research around the correlation between the misdiagnosis. So so for me, it's an injustice. Misdiagnosis, I say, is pre-sentencing. Do you know some of the statistics say that 85% of students in juvenile justice have a learning disability? That's garbage. And we know that's garbage. There just is equipped and able, if given the opportunity, to reach goals and dreams just like anybody else. And so I'm about, putting in policy and legislation and models and frameworks and pedagogies to support a systemic change in education where students are the center and their experience, their context matters.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ivy. Thank you, Dr. Ivy. Dr. Christie, tell us about your experience with equity in education.
Thank you, Dr. Hall, for this, I believe, very important and timely conversation. I work at a historically Black college and university, and so often the context is we don't need to focus on equity. We don't have to focus on issues of diversity because we're catered or we're designed, and part of our mission is to focus on students of color. And I find that very erroneous in terms of just a general context and understanding that equity extends beyond race. It really encompasses and embodies this whole intent of how do we ensure that students, regardless of their background, regardless of their identity, regardless of their experiences, that we can create a holistic learning opportunity for them, and so that we can ensure that they are getting the kind of needs and services that are required. So one of the things that I believe is very incumbent in this area is to think about the various learning styles and the teaching learning styles. One of the principles that we espouse a lot in the field of public administration is this idea of one of our classical theorists that talks about the one best way of managing people. And I like to think about education in that way. I think we have tried to create this linear process and say this is the one best way to be able to reach children or to adults in this context. But in a lot of ways, it requires us to do a whole lot more in terms of investigating and understanding the various nuances that students bring to the classroom setting. I like to approach the classroom setting like it's an incubator, like it is a place where students come, they learn, grow, and develop, but they shouldn't be fearful of what that growth and development looks like. And so it is incumbent upon the instructor to provide that welcoming and productive learning environment. So we have to think about students' various learning styles. In an era where it says for adult learners, every 32 seconds, their mind goes to something else. And so if you know that, you have to be very intentional with your instruction. And so it can't just be this monotone lecture like we had 20, 25 years ago, where there's this lecture, this yellow legal pad. I remember one of my professors had a yellow legal pad and he would just go through pages and he would be losing us along the way. Or, and I'm sure I'm dating myself, you remember the projector screen where they had the film and they put the little clear, that does not work today. So you have to think about people who are audio learners, who are visual learners, people who may learn more from peer interactions, people who may learn more from the various ways that we can infuse technology, having guest speakers, utilizing social media, utilizing and connecting to platforms that they feel comfortable with. You also have to think about how do you deal with auditory learners, people who need to hear something? Maybe it needs to be some music. So I think about last night in class, I showed a YouTube video, or it was a TED Talk video, and they started with music, and it was music that was germane to where students are. And so application for me is also important, because you can teach theories, you can teach concepts, but at the end of the day, for university students, it's important that they know how to apply those things in a real world setting. So having them engage with people who are actually doing the work, having them to wrestle with critical public policy issues, which there are a plethora today, through case studies and through the examination of current political issues. I think in that way, it helps to bridge this gap. And then regardless if and where the student is in terms of their learning abilities, we don't shut them out of the learning process. So we create avenues for everybody to engage at the level, and we create an environment that even if we fail, it's just the first attempt in learning, that it is not the end of the road for you, but how do we build on this foundation to ensure that once you leave us, that you are able to go and make a positive contribution in the organization of your choosing.
All right, Dr. Wadley.
Sitting here listening, so my lens is a little different, I guess, because I'm in P12. And so for us, equity has really changed the landscape around what does it really truly mean, and who does it benefit and who doesn't benefit, who's at the table and who's not at the table. One thing that we have to move towards is more action and not philosophical talking about equity. And I'll say that again, move towards action. So some things that we had to do was, in our school district, is disrupt some of the policies that put our children into disproportionate spaces. Because we can say we don't want disproportionality, but have we taken a look at the policies that are driving the kids into disproportionate status? Those policies, and upwards towards 30 something in my district, and we revisited those last year, and they got approved by public comment and by the school board. Secondly, we got to start looking at the data. What is the data saying, and what is it not saying? And who is it tracking and who is it not tracking? And having those crucial conversations. What I have found since my research, my dissertation was on implicit bias as a contributing factor to disproportionality. And the reason I chose that topic is because I worked so heavily in Atlanta public schools around disproportionality. And what I found is it was not policies, it was not procedures, it was people. And if you don't work with the people and their mindset, you can create a policy all day long. You'll be burning up trees because their mindsets are not changing. And then the other piece is, and this is where me as an administrator comes in, and I don't mind being heavy on this, it's holding people accountable to doing what we say we're going to do for children. Because we can talk about it, but now we get into action. And the next is we're going to hold you principal, you teacher, you area superintendent accountable to doing what's best for our children, and not just for certain kids, but for all kids. The other piece, I was talking to some colleagues in the local district early this morning around just the effects that the pandemic has had. We already knew who the disenfranchised children were before the pandemic, and now it's cast an even greater light on food insecurity, housing insecurity, instability in mental health. We knew that we, in the state of Georgia, we didn't even have a lot of beds for students as it relates to mental health. So going on the days where we can talk about people not wanting the services, that's not even been my experience. My experience has been that people want the services are not there to be gotten. But we knew that before the pandemic. And so now here we are, we find ourselves in what we consider to be a mental health crisis when we were already in a crisis prior to the pandemic. It's just widening the gap, and the gap is becoming wider and wider and wider. And it's not, we used to call it a academic achievement gap. It's an opportunity gap. How are we giving children opportunities in P12 education to go on to post-secondary? And not just making sure that we give certain kids and certain voices and certain people and certain families those opportunities, but making sure we're giving those opportunities to all children. And the opportunity that you need may be different than the opportunity that another child needs, because we're all different. We all come with our different experiences, our learning styles, like we've been talking about this morning. And so in P12 education, we've been having some really crucial conversations around, where do we need to go from here? We throw the term equity around a lot. I've seen since George Floyd's murder, which was a murder, since George Floyd's murder, I've seen tons of positions that have come up around equity. And my question to folks is, what are you going to do? Because it's more than just a position. Because if you're an equity director and you're still operating off 1980 policies, you're a title holder. That's what you are. And so at this point, Dr. Hall and colleagues, we've got to really put the pedal to the metal, in a sense, around making change, actionable change, and putting some time limits on how long we're gonna stay in certain spaces and tolerate certain things. You know, one thing that we're working on in my district is I'm rolling out systemically mandatory diversity training. One thing I rolled out last year was not only diversity training before we hire new principals in our schools, but they also had to go through a training with an equitable hiring tool that I co-developed with the City Schools of Decatur around helping people, guide them through hiring managers on how to hire and increase their diverse pool. Because it's one thing to say increase your diverse pool. Now we're talking about the mechanism to get us to the how. How do you do that? What does that look like? And when you pull that off the paper, that looks different. And so being very explicit and being very transparent, being very action bound around what we are trying to do for the betterment of our children and our society.
I love that, ladies. And I think too, I really want for, because I want to make sure that, again, one of my scriptures that I live by is by Sis Badu that says, what good do your words do if they don't understand you, right? And so we're not just talking to educators or people in higher ed or people in secondary ed, but we're talking to our community, right? And we're talking to Cheney scholars and other scholars who may watch this at another point. We're talking to the community. I think that one of the things that we need to really, really make sure that we understand and distinguish is the difference between equality and equity, right? A lot of times we heard, our predecessors, one of the things that they were fighting for, they were always talking about equality, right? They were marching for the equal rights, right? Or equal footing. But the problem with equality is this, right? Not everybody is able to start at the same spot. So what happens is that, yes, I can say, I'm going to make sure that all schools have the same books, right? That's equality. All schools have the same books and the same amount of teachers. But equity says that I understand that these kids who come from a school district where they may not have computers at home or internet at home may need more services, more goods and services than students who come from a suburban area where it's a given that they would have the internet and a computer at home, right? Equity says that not only am I going to help level the playing field, but I'm going to make sure that I help you make up for a slow start. And so if we're honest, what we're talking about, right, especially when we look at not just Black and brown kids, but when we also look at kids, white kids who are in very, very poor communities, right? One of the things that we really, really have to understand is equity is needed in these conversations, because when we talk about equality becomes rather an ambiguous word, right? Because I can say that, oh, they all have the same thing, but equity, but in reality, we understand not all of them have the same start. Some of our students are starting kindergarten and still not knowing. When we talk about many children of color, and this is not because they're slower learners, maybe they have a mother who is a single parent that may work 2 or 3 jobs. And so her son may start kindergarten not knowing his ABCs, right? And so if we're going to make these kindergarten classes equitable, then I understand that these students who come from a particular area may need more assistance to help bring them up to where we're saying that they should be. And so this is what we mean when we talk about making situations equitable, right? And one of the things that I think was a blessing in disguise when COVID happened, right? Because a lot of times we talk about COVID and all these horrible things that happened, was COVID peeled the Band-Aid back to systems that were already very much dysfunctional, as Dr. Watley pointed out, right? So during COVID, what we had the opportunity to see is that many of our students were working at a deficit before the school ever got out because of COVID, before they ever went virtual. And it was by no fault of their own. And so what we have to start doing, and I want to call parents co-laborers, right? I think it is important for parents to understand that you have a voice, right? And you have to use that voice, and a lot of parents will say, I don't even know where to start, right? One of the things you could do, we all have the internet on our phones, right? One of the things that you might want to do is look up some of the things that are happening in the school district that your son or your daughter attends, right? Look up some of the test scores and the reading scores and see how these things are being addressed. See what they're doing, what action plans they have to put in place to address some of the inequities or deficiencies that are happening in your school system. And so you've got to be your child's advocate, because a lot of times those in higher positions of power are not really advocating for our children. And so we have to fight for equity within the context of our school system. Dr. Wiley, I saw your hand.
I was sitting here thinking when you were talking about just the footing that children come to school, it's like ill-footed, and I call it what I coined it as like the Swiss cheese foundation. Some folks are born with holes, more holes than others. But then I got to go back to policy. Even when it comes down to the state of Georgia, it's not even a mandatory thing that you go to pre-K. But yet we have an expectation that when you come to kindergarten, you should be reading. That's a hole in our system. And so what happens is when we get to, if some of the data that I've reviewed over the years, sometimes most behavior referrals, right, are coming from pre-K, kindergarten, in those early years. Why? Because they don't know, they don't understand. And then oftentimes those students will get referred to special education, and right, Dr. Ivy. And why? Because they're not fitting into a mode that we haven't even prepared them to be in. And then let's go a little bit deeper to how we qualify kids for special education. That some of the eligibility criteria is riddled with bias and oppresses our students even further, putting them into a system and a block. And so it's like, for me, the most important thing is to seriously disrupt some of these policies and these procedures that we put in place to keep some people here and some people here, almost like the caste system. It's just in a different way through the context of education.
Okay, Dr. Christie.
And if I can just add, it was alarming to me that I think this upcoming school year in the fall will be the first year that children in the state of Louisiana are required to go to kindergarten, not even pre-K, but kindergarten was not required prior to. So when you describe this starting point, that creates a huge gap. So there's no Head Start, there's no early learning, there is no foundation in pre-K that prepares you for kindergarten and gives you the equal footing for first grade. I also typed in the comment as you were speaking, Dr. Hall, that I think COVID also really exposed this digital inequity. We talk about the digital divide, and people are alarmed that in 2021 and 2022, there still represented a digital divide, but it absolutely did. And it created different pathways for students, particularly during COVID, when most of the mode of delivery of school was via technology. And so if children don't have appropriate resources, didn't have a computer, they didn't have an iPad, how in the world could they engage and learn at the same level? And then I want to pivot just a minute, because I think an undertone of this whole equity conversation is around cultural competence. And so cultural competence creates a whole wealth of issues, but appropriate way. So we know under, I believe it was President Obama, where they passed the legislation, I think in accordance with the Every Child Succeeds Act, that talked about how do we examine what is happening related to discipline policies in schools and who is impacted as a result of that. And I know here in Louisiana, there is a disproportionality in terms of the number of African American girls that are harshly disciplined as it relates to their behavior. And so one of my current students, who's a doctoral student, she's doing a study, and I've been reading along with her. And some of those schools are flagged if their discipline outcomes favor one group, or inadvertently impacts one group over the other. And so some of those school districts here in various parishes were required to engage in cultural competence professional development training. And so just our examination of administrators and their understanding of terms, Dr. Watley, such as implicit bias or institutional bias, or even the notion that maybe we need to revisit our policies around this, because if you are punishing these students with exclusionary discipline, meaning that they are out of school with suspension, then that also impacts their educational attainment, when really some of the cultural competence, and Cross developed a wonderful cultural competence continuum back in the 1980s to just talked about where you are and how you can navigate along this continuum. The more that you learn about this notion that everybody comes from a different context, and we can't, again, operate from this one size fit all just because people are the same race, the same gender, that we stereotype them in the same way. Absolutely not. Everybody, regardless of those things, come to the academic enterprise with various kinds of needs and issues. And if we are not in a position to understand those, exude some empathy related to those, and ensure that our policies are not feeding into those biases, but rather seeking to understand how we can best provide services, then these gaps that we have seen or that were exposed during COVID, I think are going to continue to be exacerbated.
And I want to break this thing down even further, right? Because one of the things that I think that, because we've been using a lot of school terminology, right? But I think that one of the things I think that people don't think enough about, right? Like, it's this whole notion of the school to prison pipeline, right? And I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was maybe like 3 years ago, it might be 4, because sometimes I feel like I live in a time warp, so it might be 4 or more, but I think it was 3. I had the opportunity to go to the National Black Caucus in DC with my former principal and some students that we chose, and they were ushers, and we got to sit in on a number of discussions. And one discussion in particular that we sat in on, they were women who were formerly incarcerated, who were talking about, and they had, statistical data to back them up, how Black girls within the educational system were most often the recipients of disciplinary measures, which often led them to jail, right? To become part of the school to prison pipeline. And what they were seeing was these numbers were growing so rapidly that the Black girls were almost entering at the same rate as the men, right? And so, well, you said, well, Dr. Hall, what does that have to do with our children? So what happens is, and we know that teenage girls, Black, white, Latino, and otherwise, go through behavioral changes. It's just part of being a teenager, right? But what we see is a lot of times, Black and brown girls within the context of the educational system, when they act out, any disciplinary infractions are usually handled with expulsion, right? Very, very punitive measures, right? Whole lot of disciplinary measures, right? Instead of there being something else that is done, right? Where the same is not happening to their white counterparts. And so what happens is, so you have these girls who are becoming part of the school to prison pipeline because maybe they need And I like that Dr. Ivy put it in the comment, they need restorative measures, which brings me to another point. And as that recently, I did the series a couple of years ago, the restorative practices training for Fulton County school system, but we've been doing it at Cheney, right? Because one of the things that we see is that punitive measures do nothing but separate the very students that we intend to help, right? A lot of the students that get expelled, sometimes they never come back and they become part of that dropout rate. A lot of those students end up with marks on their record that cause them to serve more time or in jail sentences or prison sentences, when there could have been something simple as a restorative circle, right? Community service, something that could restore them to a place where they are healthy, whole, and productive parts of their academic communities. Ladies, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
You know, I go back to I'm sorry, this is my lens, is unaddressed trauma. I mean, you're talking about trauma responses. And so if you don't have courageous and compassionate leaders that are going to take the time to unpack some stuff and get somebody some help, all you're doing is going to continue to feed what I call the cycle of inequity, inequity, injustice, racial disparity, fueled by poverty, unaddressed trauma, which then makes you misinterpret, misdiagnose, misrepresent, social and emotional abilities, cognitive abilities, and that just then turns your back. This thing goes round and round. And I may be a little cynical, but I think sometimes it's intentional. They know they have to know what they're doing.
Absolutely, Dr. Absolutely, and that's something that people tend to gloss over, is that we tend to operate from this assumption that all educators want to see children to do well, and that's an absolute lie. No, all educators do not want to see children do well. In fact, I've been told that by certain educators that they don't even like children. Okay, so we got to disrupt that notion that folks want to see kids do well, because it actually benefits some people for them to be poor. Some people in society like for folks to be poor, disenfranchised, and marginalized, and folks making money off of it too. So let's be clear.
Yes. Broken people feed broken systems, and broken systems feed on broken people. It's not that difficult to see.
It's not. And so when we talk about like restorative practices, that's an awesome thing. I love restorative practices. I've rolled it out systemically. But guess what I've also done, Dr. Christie and Dr. Ivy and Dr. Hall and all the rest of you on the line? In my position of influence, I'm holding you accountable to doing it, principal. Because I'm not going to wait till you to be restorative. You got a document that you have. So through that student code of conduct that I wrote, it's absolutely in there that you got to do X, Y, and Z before you do this, there. And if you don't do, it's going to come back around. And so therein lies some of the problem, Dr. Hall, is the accountability measures for people to do. And if you can't do it, if you won't do it, my goal is to coach you out to where you need to be. Because you don't need to be here with these kids. So if you're not coming in with, because it's too much at stake. There was already too much at stake before the pandemic. Now we coach you out. Now we're on fire now. So now it's the time where I'm gonna document you out. So if you don't want to do it, if you're not, because this train is going to California, Miss Wendy, okay? Let's be clear. You can go to New York all day long. But if you're not going with us this way, and that's where the accountability is, you write the policy, you do the training, and then after that, you hold people accountable and put their feet to the fire. Otherwise, you document them out. Because it's too many people. We're dancing too many lemons in these school districts, and they're hurting our children. So they're re-traumatizing our kids. They already been through enough. So I'm not going to take you through one more diversity training. Obviously, you don't want it. All right. So that's where we have to teak and leak you out of here and put you where you need to be, because there's a place for you. It is. But you just won't be here with our children. And those are the tough conversations that I know for me as an ED, we have to have, because I'm not going to soft play this thing, because guess what? These babies can't read. These discipline situations are causing me to stay up at night, and you're the problem. So you got to go.
I love that. One of my husband's principals used to say, people are on the wrong seat on the bus. And so we need to help you find your right seat. So I love that. I love the piece of accountability. And I see your hand, Ms. Wendy. What I heard as you were speaking is it also is incumbent on the administrators to create a culture that says exactly what you are doing. And so how can we have a culturally responsive educational system if we don't have people who understand the cultural context by which these children come? I also love and completely embrace this notion that there is trauma. Dr. Hall and I, she worked at an alternative school, and I would come in volunteering to do programming with those kids. And so there would be some weeks they would be excited about what we're doing. But then one day it just hit me like, listen, the things that these children are saying to you, the experiences that they have. I mean, this was Dr. Ivy and Dr. Wiley, this was their last stop. If they didn't get it here, the only opportunity for them to complete their education was going to be through some GED program. And so we had to be very strategic and say, we need to identify ways in which we can connect with these kids, allow them to work through whatever it is that they've been through, and to tell them that this does not have to define you. Neither does this have to be a detour, but there is still destiny for you. There is still a purpose for you. You were still created to do something significant. And we all have faced challenges, maybe not to the degree that you have, but we all have faced challenges, but it is the teacher often who makes the difference. I have this one quote I want to share saying that sometimes in a child's world, the teacher is the only one who can truly see their potential, their spark, the special things that they do, even if they're idiosyncratic to the rest of the world. And so the teacher has the capacity to either feed that or kill it. And so we understand that there are some other things at play in terms of, yes, we need more teachers' assistants. Yes, we need more classroom student-teacher ratio, all of those things. But Dr. Watley, you said it best, where the rubber meets the road. If this is not what you're called to do, you should not be engaged in this kind of work because somebody's life is at stake. And people say, well, why do you do what you do? Because when I show up at a public service agency 20 years from now trying to get my Social Security benefits or trying to go to the doctor, I need to know that I played a part in ensuring that there was a cadre of professionals who could operate with some ethical moral compass, who are competent, who are courageous, and who are going to show up and be productive and contributing members to society. And if you are not interested in those things, you are on the wrong seat on the bus, and maybe even on the wrong bus.
Wendy, I saw your hand up. What did you want to say? You're muted. You're muted.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be present with the distinguished panel. I really took in everything that you said. I'm currently a student at Cheney University, going through the education program, and I really appreciate being invited to a meeting like this because I have worked with children for over 25 years in and out of the classroom. And currently I was working with a teacher as assistant in the classroom. And the reason that I'm really glad that I'm on this Zoom meeting is because I overheard her have this conversation with another teacher. Now she was white and the other teacher was white. And she said to the teacher, well, you know, the white race is under assault and we have to protect ourselves. Now, I don't know whether she knew that I was listening, but when you're in that type of environment, you know, walls have ears. And I was really taken aback by what she said because she is teaching our children. And like one of the panelists said that, I think it was Miss Watley, she was saying that they're teaching our children and they may not want to see our children succeed. And I stayed in the classroom because honestly, I believe that to be true. I believe that there are some educators who do not want our students to achieve. And I'm glad that I'm in this program because my goal is to be an educational advocate, and I want to be able to advocate for these children, and not only my children, but all children, to, you know, to advocate for them, to let them know that there is someone in their corner, and also to give parents a voice too, give them a voice into how their children are educated. So I really appreciate all the information that I'm getting, everything that you're sharing. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is that has anyone, or is there any programs or professional development where teachers can understand how trauma affects children? Because I think they're miseducated in trauma and what, you know, what the underlying conditions are for the for trauma, because our children, a lot of children, Black children, white children, Hispanic children, ESL children come into the classroom already traumatized with trauma. And I think that teachers should be aware of the trauma and what can cause this trauma and how the students react to certain situations and environments once they enter school.
I want to touch on that, Wendy, in that I'll give you an example, right? A couple of years ago, I took a test when I was at the alternative school called I.R.A.C, Adverse Childhood Experiences Assessment or exam. I forgot what the other S stood for. Okay, so in taking the ACs, what happened was, you know, it just asked you general questions about, you know, what's their addiction in your family? Have you ever been abused, or have you ever seen anybody be abused, right? And I remember taking the test and having quite a high number, but I lied about it because I was like, these folks ain't gonna know all my business now, you know. But I thought about it, and what it did was, because I've always been an advocate for children, always have loved working in education, which is why I've been in it for so long. But when I went to the alternative school, some of the cases that I was seeing and the students were so severe that I was like, maybe I'm in the wrong line of work. Maybe this ain't for me no more, right? But what happens is what I realize is that their adverse childhood experiences were so traumatic that what we were seeing when we would see this aggression and defensiveness was really the manifestation of the things that they had been through. And it really was a wall they had built up, right? Or Dr. Ivy, thank you. It was their trauma response. And so even on the university level, because what we're seeing is, and I think we've got to stop thinking just because somebody made it to college, they got it all together, right? But what we're seeing is these things are trickling up at every state. They're trickling up, okay? And so just because a kid is astute enough to make it to college does not mean that this kid, and it really is a kid because, you know, the adult brain doesn't fully form until it's 25. So it really is still a kid when they're coming to college. And a lot of times professors are like, oh, these new kids, and they don't, and what a lot of professors don't understand is that trauma is not a new thing, right? But in generations past, I think that we were more able to hide many of the adverse things that we had experienced. And maybe like for me, like say for instance, my adverse childhood experiences caused me to delve deeper into my studies, right? It caused me to be, well, you know what, these things may be happening at home, but one thing you're not going to say is that Carolyn Hall ain't smart. Okay, so I delved deeper, right? And caused myself to go further because I knew, for me, I didn't want to live like that, if that makes sense, right? Without giving too much information. Right. But one of the things that we've seen with our students, and I really think that this generation of young people that we're seeing, because we also understand that trauma is encoded in the DNA. So what we're seeing is even more traumatized people. So it's not, again, I'm not saying that trauma is anything new, but if this is like the 6th, 7th generation of a traumatized child, what exactly are we expecting that we're going to get? So yes, they're going to be defensive to their professors because they already believe oftentimes that everybody is against them, right? And yes, they may speak to them in what the professor perceives as a disrespectful tone, but that professor may not necessarily understand that coming from certain hostile environments, that is how people speak when they are engaged in a disagreement, right? And so really it is a communication disconnect that many educators have got to be taught how to address, right? I think likewise, we also have to think about the fact that we've got to teach people, because this is something that is not happening, right? And this is why the retention rate of teachers in K through 12 is so low. When we're teaching them, a lot of this information is archaic, right? And a lot of the information that they're learning in these educational programs is whitewashed. And they're not understanding that when they get in a classroom, yes, you got to teach them how reading comprehension skills, but you got to address the whole person. So one day, Sam may have come in and he was excited about learning. Next day, Sam come in, Sam is knocking over desks and telling you, shut your blank up, right? But what you have to do is, and this is a very, very difficult thing, you've got to understand that what Sam is doing, it is not personal, but Sam is taking out on you what he experienced last night that has caused him to change from yesterday till today. So we've got to learn how to address the whole person, the whole student. And one of the things that caused me, because when I first got to the alternative school, again, I stressed, I thought I was being punked or punished, right? But when I learned how to address the whole students, I fell in love. And they loved me. And I actually cried when I had to leave, right? Because even in that difficulty, what I learned how to do was to look beyond their faults and see their needs. And so that is something that happens with culturally responsive teaching. Because if teachers don't understand, because it's not just enough to put Susie in a poor district, right? Be they Black, white, or otherwise. You can't just put Susie, who has come from this upscale background, in this school with these poor children, right? Because Susie needs to understand the cultural nuances that happens to these children, right? For example, a lot of teachers who have never come into contact with inner city students sometimes think, well, they just can't learn, when they don't understand the concept of endemic devaluation, right? Endemic devaluation says that within a cultural context that they've been taught to believe that something does not have value. And education is one of those things. But if you understand that, right? But you know that this is not some sort of innate problem that they just can't learn, then you know how to address these students and meet them where they are, which may cause for you to know them, to know what their likes are, to bring in some of their likes in the classroom. For example, when I was working in the alternative school, getting them to read was like being at the dentist's office with no anesthesia, okay? Point blank and a period. But what I would do often is I would bring in, so I knew that they were crazy about, they love music, right? And this is not rocket science. So what I would do is I may bring in a song by the Baby or Meg Thee Stallion, the clean version, of course, right? And we would decipher what the lyrics are. And I would teach them how that was analysis or critical thinking, right? And then I would pull in a poem by Langston Hughes or Claude McKay to show them how we can use our words in such a way. When we become masters of the English language, we learn to use our words in such a way that they convey different thoughts and feelings. Well, see, then they plug in. But that is culturally responsive teaching.
Right.
And we've got to teach educators at all levels how to do that. You know, it can't be just about what you want to do. I had to put that bag down a long time ago. because I would love to talk about Alice Walker, Maya Angelou, Claude McKay all day long. I would love to talk about Amiri Baraka, Notazaki Shange, and all the greats all day long, all day, every day. Okay. But that is not what they're into. And it doesn't mean I have to dumb down, but it means that I have to meet them where they are to take them where I want them to go. And that's not what is happening. But that is also an example of equity in action. I think another one of my panelists had their hands up.
I just say I'm sorry, Jillian, can I just do real quick? So when I went to go get the doctorate, is because, teachers are making errant referrals for special needs, so my urgency is teachers have to know, like you're talking about. And so I created this course, but the thing is, teachers need to be equipped, but they also have to have those leaders over them that allow this kind of stuff to happen, because I ended up having educators that felt I was putting more heavy on them because they weren't allowed to do what I was telling them that they needed to do. So that's when I started to work toward more systemic solutions, But yeah, you got the leaders like Jillian was talking about, get it together, get somewhere.
I love it. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that too, Dr. Ivy. I think that's you made me think of something so important. Why people are so glad I sit in this ED seat is because a lot of people who make it to this level tend to only be principals or teachers. And my background is in psychology. So I'm coming from a different lens when it looks at leadership. So I'm raising those concerns for folks. And you're right. An initiative is only an initiative, but if you don't have nobody to support it, it just lands in your classroom. It's not changing the culture and climate of the school or the system. But what I was going to say earlier, Carolyn, is the work at Georgia State. I'm an adjunct at Georgia State in the graduate school for counseling and psychological services. And what I did years ago was sit down with the program people and talk about what we were seeing in practicum students and internships, and how we could change the course curriculum to make them more effective. Because a lot of times they're front loading for school psychologists. They're doing a lot of work around assessment and evaluation, but in terms of mental health and trauma, there was not a lot of work around that. So we gotta also look at our training programs and make sure that they're preparing our students for what they're going to encounter when they get into a P12 situation or setting. The other thing is, something that was super shocking, not shocking, but I'll say shocking for lack of a better word today. A couple of years ago, I got a certification in trauma and attachment, and I started doing a lot of work around that. And I went to speak at a school about children and trauma and the brain development and all those types of things. And after I was done with that training, I had about 30 teachers line up because they had not dealt with their own trauma. So we sometimes dump in their lap as teachers stuff they haven't even dealt with themselves on a personal level. So they come with this thought of, I got over it, so you get over it. I mean, these are real things that are said to our children, because sometimes we again come from the assumption that all schools are safe. And let me dispel that. No, some schools re-traumatize our babies. And we got to call that out and fire those people too. I don't mind being heavy. It's no problem for me. I sleep good at night because it's all about the kids. Because you're not helping our children. And so one thing that we've been very intentional about in my department is cross-working with HR around making sure that we're beefing up our health and wellness for our leaders and our teachers, because this work is not just for the kids. This work is for the folks who sit in front of our children. So if you're sitting in front of these babies and you're not well, whoa, that's a problem. If you're sitting in front of our babies and that's not well. So one thing that's we're doing here in my district, but another thing that I did at Georgia State was, you know what I started giving my graduate students every year in my child psychopathology class, y'all? You got to take the ACE the first day. You got to take the I.R.A.C, the implicit associations test, the next month, because what we have tended to do in these graduate programs is focus on helping them over there, and there's no focus on you over here. And so what you do is you show up with these kids over here, nobody's coached you around doing your own intentional work on yourself, because you're so busy trying to save them over there is you forgot to take a look at yourself. You're broken. A teacher, you're broken. Administrator, you're broken. Madam Superintendent. So you can't have a well system until you well. And those are facts. I sit around broken people all day long looking good in suits. So we can't fix the kids until we fix the adults or do it together, and for the very least. Because what we do in school systems is put programs in to help them. It's to help y'all. Them over there.
Dr. Wanda, let me interject something. Let me interject something, because I think what you're saying is extremely pertinent, right? But I also think that, in all honesty, not a lot of space is given for teachers to do self-care.
It's not. And that's what I'm talking about when I said what I said about what we've done in my district that's intentional about giving them that self-care. It's more than just an EAP card. I'll say that too. Some people need time off. They need spaces and calendars. This is where the action comes in, because I can tell you, Dr. Hall, to take care of yourself, right? But if I don't create the conditions for you to do that, that's on me as a leader. I can tell you, Dr. Ivy, to be a successful instructor or a successful psychologist, but as your leader, it's my job to create the conditions for that to happen. And so therein lies that two-pronged conversation that often doesn't get had. What's your job in this as a leader? Because I can do my job as a teacher, as a principal, but when you're going up the ranks, it's our job to provide the conditions for you to take that time. It's that time. Yes, it does. Brokenness does sit in high places. It's our job, Dr. Ivy, to make sure that you have what you need, not only as a psychologist, but you have what you need psychologically to do what your job needs to do. So some school systems, not all, Dr. Hall, but some have built in asynchronous days to give people mental health breaks. Some school systems have given mental health days in school districts, but not all. And that's where I find that we need to start moving in all districts, because if other people are benefiting from that, why do we have to recreate the wheel? We just need to keep doing that, because it's what's best for our teachers, our staff, and our students.
I thank you for that. I thank you for that. But I think, that having spent time in a unnamed metropolitan Atlanta school district myself, that self-care became more of a buzzword than an actionable item. Right?
Yeah.
And then what happens is that they're expecting for the teacher to resolve all these issues that really are above his or her pay grade. And I think Dr. Ivy's book addresses that. Grounded Learning, Education's Recovery Plan, right? Because the truth of the matter is we have a broken system right now.
Right.
It's broken. It's broken at every level, right? Even in terms of, like, I always tell people, because, and I tell them this not to be negative Nelly, but because it's honesty, right? Like, I would meet parents who would always scream, "Oh, my child is graduating with honors from so-and-so school." And we're going to try to get them into very, very unrealistic, schools, And what I would tell them is, they got to be very careful about those grades, because most grades nowadays are inflated.
Absolutely.
Right? Most grades nowadays are inflated, right? On average, the average African-American high school senior graduates reading, the average one, right? Graduates reading on the 9th grade level. And it's not that much higher for their white counterparts, not a whole lot higher, okay? So what happens is, even though you're telling me your child is graduating with honors sometimes just means that they turned in all the work on time. Doesn't mean that it was done correctly. They just turned it in all on time, right? And they didn't give the teacher trouble. So there may be honors. I say that because what I'm trying to stress to those parents that I tell this to is, your child is still going to need additional help. They're going to need additional help when they go to college, right? I worked at a very prestigious 4-year institution where people rant and rave about how the young ladies are so brilliant, but many of them had issues in writing and critical reading and analysis. Nobody ever talks about that because it's a hush-hush thing, right? But the truth of the matter is because all these students, Black, white, and otherwise, are coming in with a deficit that has to be addressed because we have a broken system.
And even beyond that, to dovetail that, most textbooks are written at 5th, 6th grade level. So we can say that, yes, this child has excelled, but absolutely. And we could say probably 10, 20 years ago that we saw these deficits at undergraduate level. We see them at the graduate level. We see them people who are pursuing a doctoral degree, and there are major writing challenges. There are major critical thinking and analysis, and people have been able to navigate. And so I think we see these deficits because of COVID in K through 12, but we see them everywhere in institutions of higher learning at every level, because there was a lot of great inflation. There was it was a lot of consideration that people are managing a lot, and that there are some mental health things, and because of the isolation and quarantine, that we just don't need to apply pressure. But we have to move away also from this trophy mentality that because you show up, that everybody gets a trophy. Whether you did something significant or not, we're going to give you a trophy. Well, that sends the wrong message, because then at this level, when we assess students accurately and we say that, no, these are some issues, these are some challenges, and these things must be addressed before you can navigate to the next level, then we are being challenged because they are suggesting exactly what you're saying. But when you look at my transcript from undergrad, when you look at my transcript from high school, it is suggesting this and this. It may be, but at this level, there is clearly a distinction between where you should be and where you actually are. And then this becomes even more complex with the millennials, who believe that there's this degree of entitlement, there's this degree that I do show up, and because I show up, you are supposed, and I'm paying, that I'm supposed to be awarded this. I don't necessarily fall into that kind of mindset, because I think it does students and adults a disservice, and that it is better in this incubator, in this nurturing environment, that we work on those deficiencies and that we are honest and transparent about those, as opposed to you entering into the workplace and you having this real reality check that you are not where you should be.
That's a powerful statement. Dr. Ivy has been dropping some bombs in the chat. Okay.
Yes, yes.
I wish I could share the chat with the people that are watching on Facebook and YouTube, because Dr. Ivy is dropping some straight bombs. I'm gonna cut and paste.
Your transcript lied to you. It deceived you, and it did.
Right. So I want to go ahead and wrap this up, and I want to give some takeaways, right? Because one of the things about the Summer Scholar Series is that I want our scholars and the community to walk away feeling that they have some takeaways to do some things to change some lives, right? And I want for you, let's say that here I am, a parent, and I believe that my baby is in a school system where they're not getting an equitable education. They're just not getting a really good education, but I can't afford to take them anywhere else. What would you say that I should do?
You got us all stumped here. Right. Oh gosh, it's true. I would say, but this whole thing too, I think sometimes there's resources out there, and I'm not saying, because it's obviously, disproportionate, that the resources issue is a real thing. And the barriers, we were talking about those barriers that you had shared with us, over 2 decades ago when I started education, we were talking about the same thing then. And so, but just to realize also that there's been an intentional effort to create learned helplessness and normalization of dysfunction. And so if there is something out there, it doesn't have to be in the school. It could be civic, it could be community, it could be church. You know what I mean? It's just, you feel that heavy. I mean, we feel it, that kind of blanket of heaviness that's over our communities that prevent them even from accessing something exercising their creative ability, even if it is out there. yeah, where is the rich? Where is the rich somebody, philanthropist who's all the kind of leader that we described here today? That's who we need to find.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Ivy. That was very informative. I think that that parents should contact their local representatives, go to these school board meetings, look at the budget, and have a voice, because a lot of times I think parents just accept the curriculum as it is, and they accept the norms of the school as it is, and they may not feel that they have a voice to change it. So my advice would be to contact local representatives, school boards, go to school board meetings, vote. If your elected officials are not making sure that your child is getting the education that they deserve, then vote them out. So I think that that's a way, that's a good start for most parents who have their children in underserved schools.
Okay.
I think too, to extend your point, Wendy, that's a good point. I'm shocked that sometimes at our school board meetings who shows up and who doesn't. But then sometimes I have to also realize that sometimes that's by design, because some people can't come at those times. I'm very clear about that. I think that what parents have got to do is to realize, and this is a fact, is that it's a lot of politics in education. And so you really have to be discerning beyond titles about who is there for your child. Just because it's a teacher, a principal, and it's executive director or superintendent, those titles don't matter. It's whether or not a person has the heart for the work and for your child. And seeking those people out, no matter if it's across the district or another state, or even on this panel, you want to reach out to one of us so we can help plug you in. But that's what the community is about. And so that would be my answer, because it does take people in different spaces to change certain things. And one person alone cannot do it. It's too big, it's too much, it's too wide, it's too deep. And so it takes us joining hands and supporting parents, but it also takes those of us who are at the table, who are making decisions and sitting next to people making decisions, to keep this work at the forefront of their brains. Because what I'm tired of is people sitting in positions not doing nothing. And so I'm just clear about that with myself. I'm at the table and I am doing something. Now, I can't speak for everybody, but that's my commitment to myself, my God, my child, my family, and my people. And so whatever you have to do, if you got to reach out to me and I need to plug you in Kansas, it's disruptors all over these 50 states, okay? And we'll plug you in. Drop mic on that.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm going to echo Dr. Ivy's. We're voting for you, Dr. Watley, for the next superintendent.
I just finished my superintendent program. I got tapped, so we'll see.
Absolutely wonderful. I would say that in terms of the equity piece, and to end the conversation somewhat in the ways in which we began, describing the difference between equity and equality, I think that we can hold schools accountable and responsible, but I think as parents, we have to do more. I think as community people, we have to do more. It really burns my bubble, using some of my grandmother's terminology. When we show up and we say, well, we didn't know. There is no excuse for us not knowing. Information is at the tip of our fingertips. And so we can learn more. And the more that we learn, then we can better advocate for our children. But we can't show up and be, not aware or unaware of the fact that these inequities exist, first and foremost. Secondly, not be aware of maybe the historical context, the school district and that school where your child is attending and where there are educational gaps. Looking at those, all that stuff is public information, looking at those test scores. And if you don't, as Dr. Watley and Dr. Ivy noted, reach out to someone who can help. Any of us who can help you say, hey, this is what's happening here. And this is how you need to advocate, because advocacy is wonderful, but you need to know what you're advocating for. And you need to be armed with the right kind of information education, so that when you become disrupted, it's not a distraction, but rather it is an opportunity, it creates opportunity for you to really ensure that change exists. I think you have to be aware of social emotional learning. You have to know better who your child is than the teacher is. You know, my father used to always say, no teacher can ever tell me anything about you that I don't already know. And he was an educator as well. Now, they may help confirm some stuff that I know, but there are absolutely some things that they will say that I'll say, that's not my child. Today, we see that kind of advocacy, but it is not authentic advocacy, because we do not take the opportunity to understand where there has been trauma. We don't embrace the fact that maybe our child has some deficits. We have eluded from the position that maybe the person who was saying that my child needed some extra and additional support services, that they really do. And that's not a bad thing. It is ensuring, that's what equity does. It ensures that everything that your child needs in order to be successful in this learning environment, that they can do that. There are free resources for you to get that, starting from Head Start all the way through the 12th grade. And even when you get here on the academic campus at the institutions of higher learning. So know who your child is, know what their strengths are, know what their weaknesses are, understand that maybe they learn differently, and demand that differentiation in terms of instruction. But you have to do your part too, because schools can't fill every single gap. They're not designed to do that. So there are so many free programs, so many tutorials, and you have Khan Academy. And, you know, we can just go down the list of supplemental things that you can do to assist your child so that you can really advocate for them and you can really ensure that those learning outcomes and objectives work. We all know once you leave K through 12 and you come to institutions of higher learning, if you don't make that kind of investment, you won't be successful. So it is my hope that, I think someone said, arm yourself, get the knowledge, be authentic, and advocate on the right platform for your children.
Well, ladies, let me just say this has been an absolutely wonderful discussion. And I want to make sure now, because the other thing you can do is you can like, share, tag this post, okay? So you can have other people become just as informed as you have been informed today. Also, make sure that you continue to take part in Cheney's Summer Scholar Series, where we discuss a host of critical topics aimed at empowering and equipping the community, you know, because maybe these for the culture, right? And so, and when I say for the culture, I mean they are about the empowerment of people of color and the community. And so I want to make sure that each and every person does their part in becoming learned about the topics that affect the community. And so we want you to make sure you join in these conversations. I also want you to make sure that you get a copy of Dr. Ivy Bonk's book, Grounded Learning, Education's Recovery Plan. You can get that book on Amazon. I want you to make sure you check out Dr. Christie's book, Write Your Own Ticket, A Guide to Success in College and Beyond. That is available on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. And Dr. Watley, you also have a book. Drop that name for us.
Lessons for Our Daughters. It'll be dropping in August of this year, and it'll be on Amazon. I'll let you know.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. So we just thank you today. And again, my name is Dr. Carolyn Hall. I am the coordinator of assessment and continuous improvement at Cheney University. And as always, make sure you come back. We shall see you in about 2 weeks for Cheney Summer Scholar Series. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.